before I commence. Okay. Um, well, it sounds like there's uh, many of you who are perhaps not at 118%. Maybe the 18 would be more accurate, which would be okay. Uh, the some things some things you just can't do anything about, and so I certainly understand that the illness stuff and things like that. You just have to tough through it, as best you can, and realize that you're not going to be able to do everything, and that's fine. If you have issues with due dates or stuff like that, certainly let me know. And I've got your first set of reflections that I hope to get into in the next couple of days, and I've also got your postings from the groups in terms of access to the group folders, and I intend to go through those also as soon as I get those reflections done. I'll kind of take a look at those first. Now, in terms of the reflections, I want you to know that since they are reflections, there's not really a grading scale for those, except you did them. I took a look at them, gave you what I felt was any feedback that might clarify it or might make it a little cleaner. You don't need to rewrite. You don't need to republish. And once I take a look at it, I'll assign credit. And so you'll get a grade of credit, which basically means you're fine. And the feedback is just for your information and just kind of a little bit of help. I've always kind of thought that a person's reflections are their own, and there's no right or wrong sort of notion to reflections. But sometimes I may not quite understand exactly what you're saying, and so I'll say, okay, well, I I didn't get this part, but it sounds like you're saying, I'll put on my counselor's hat, my licensed counselor's hat, and do I hear what you're saying, and I think it's, so I'll do a little bit of that. And, but there are no right, wrong answers, no incomplete answers, any of that. It's a credit, no credit sort of thing. Um, I think I stressed that at the beginning. I just wanted to come back and mention it again. And the same thing, I'll kind of monitor the group uh, folders just to see how it's going and where you're going with those projects and that you are meeting and, those sorts of things. I will not engage too much in those. At some point in, oh, late March, early April, I'll ask that you post a kind of a where you are with it version, and I'll look at that and offer any feedback on that that might be needed. And then you'll have a period of time there to post up the final version of that group project. And so we'll try to keep on top of that. So far, I've managed to avoid the dreaded disease, but we were running a little close this week because my son, who's a lawyer who lives with us, had come into contact, had been identified by uh, tracing that he had been in contact with somebody that was in the hospital with COVID, and so he had to be tested and had to quarantine for the 3 or 4 days until the test came back, and turned out he was fine. So we dodged that bullet. So it's, I understand it's a difficult time right now. So please feel free to, uh, you know, let me know if you have issues and what you need to do with those. Okay. Um, this week was really, I know we did not finish up with kind of the talking through the strategic planning model stuff. And uh, I ask you to kind of read those 2 or 3 chapters in that text material in the little pamphlet that was assigned for that, because I don't really know that there's a need to talk about that a lot unless you have questions. But it is a matter of identifying kind of the mission and the value statements and all that drive the organization, school, division, whatever. And then beyond that point, thinking in a very systematic manner as to how to go about accomplishing that in sort of that whole backwards planning mode, so that you work back to what you can actually do now in the short term, and what outcomes you can expect to see. The only thing I wanted to mention there, which we'll mention again tonight, is the necessity of being precise and detailed in terms of metrics. There we tend to leave a lot of the um, kind of definition of metrics or identification of metrics to summative measures that are not very detailed and not very precise, and in some ways not very accurate. Like graduation rates and uh, number of AP tests taken, or year-end test scores, if there are any left to report, or things like that we tend to think of as the way we measure schools, but we really measure schools in smaller increments and in more formative ways. And so we're always looking for short-term metrics that will tell us in a relatively short term grading period, month, couple weeks, whatever, how something is going, because then if we discover that it's not going according to plan, we always have the opportunity and the option of going back and looking at a change in strategy, or a way of attacking the strategy a little differently. And so these things are not locked in stone. But by not having formative metrics, we kind of are locking them in stone. And if you try something for school improvement and you check at the end of the year, see how they're, or the end of the semester, how they're doing on test scores and attendance and things like that, or number of events that parents have been to or have been engaged in, not been to anymore. But if you live on those things and you get to the end of the year and semester and you realize it's not working, you've lost a whole semester with those students, or you've lost a whole year with those students. And so it's always good in any sort of evaluation setting or evaluation model to have those shorter term metrics, very precise metrics that you can deal with. And a lot of times they're not things you have to create. They might be quizzes, or they might be benchmark type things, or there might be entry quizzes or exit quizzes or homework type opportunities, or observations of student work in a either virtual or face-to-face settings if you're dealing face-to-face. And so it's we want to not lose the value of that formative data. And so I always encourage people to be precise and to have as many short-term sort of measures as possible, because it really does. You've wasted everybody's time if you wait on summative measures and then realize that it didn't work, or it didn't work the way you thought it would. And in particular with the opportunity gaps and the different levels of performance by different students and different categories of students, that makes it even more imperative to have these formative metrics to deal with if you can. Any questions or thoughts about that? Before I ask you about your your review of a school improvement plan for a school, and what you found, or once again, what you may have been surprised about or what you were not surprised about. Anything else any other comments or anything? Okay. Uh, well, one of the things that you were asked to do was to locate a current school improvement plan, and I'm assuming that was not an overly difficult process, because all schools in the state have to have one, and so it's not a they don't have it. It's a required to have it. So they'll have, schools have it in some form or another. And whether that identified programs that would lend themselves to an evaluation or to being evaluated. And so I guess my question would be, did you find, assuming you found school improvement plan, did you find any surprises in it? Did you find, sometimes they get stuck in a file drawer and don't see the light of day after they've been submitted. And so, it's kind of important to realize that they're there for a reason, as long as with the school improvement team, but we'll talk about the school improvement plan first. So tell me, did you find anything surprising or interesting?
What I found surprising.
Oh, sorry, go ahead, Gabby.
You're good, James. Go ahead.
One of our goals for our school is, I'm at an elementary school and working with small group reading instruction. And the goal is at least twice a week for each teacher. And one thing they found was some grade levels are not doing that at this time because they're still scared of the 6 feet or closer for the kids to be close to their table. And so that's just a health thing they're looking at. So they've noticed that some grade levels, their scores are higher because they are doing the small group strategy instruction. So that's something that our group is going to work on for our research anyway. And our school is curious about the results of that program and about the study.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, Gabby.
What I found interesting with my school improvement plan was literally just procedures for what to do in case of an emergency. I've politely questioned, like, hey, we're doing a school improvement plan. Like, I thought it had to have this, this, and this. And the response was very nonchalant. It seemed like, yeah, well, it's just kind of like common sense. And I'm like, oh, okay, yeah, sure. I mean, this is my AP. I can't really correct too much being in a leadership program, but I will say that, like, we have our school improvement plan document on a little bookshelf and it's tucked away forever and ever. But we also are working really hard with our SIT team with like MTSS and data and like ramping up a bunch of programs for student achievement. But I just thought it was interesting that it's not labeled in the school improvement plan document.
Yeah,
so
that's an interesting setup.
yeah, and it was just like what to do in case of a tornado, and I was like, oh yeah, school improvement for sure.
Yeah, well, it'd be improvement. You get people out alive, maybe, I don't know, or whatever.
Mine was the same way as Gabby's. It was like emergency stuff.
Yeah, emergency procedures. Yeah, school safety plan probably, or a part of the school safety plan, the one that deals with Mother Nature and unforeseen type things. It's a shame because I do think there is a general lack of appreciation of the proper role of planning in improving the school, because I mean, and you can't do all things at once. And so, the school improvement team may be spinning its wheels a little bit, trying to manage programs, not knowing necessarily the relationship to each other in a school improvement plan. Because, there are some things that are inconsistent with each other. If you want to deal with opportunity gaps, then MTSS is not a way to deal with opportunity gaps. It's a way of creating bigger opportunity gaps, quite frankly. And so there is some, sentiment that's beginning to surface in lots of different places that maybe we should go with a slightly different model, but I don't know what the appetite at the state is to think about that quite yet. But without having that guiding document, without having that guiding outline that says, okay, this is what we want the school to be, and in order to looking at where we are, this is what we need to do. And here are the strategies, and here are the resources we need, and here are all those things that we need to have in order to do that. And okay, is that a higher priority than this, or is that a higher priority than that? What is the priority? Because you can't, you can't fix everything all at once. You have to decide what the most important issues are, and how do you go about, getting at those most important issues. So it is kind of a shame that they have chosen really not to deal with that as much as they probably could have. And so, that'd be an interesting school evaluation project on its own. How do you politely, and maybe you don't politely, how do you tell people that they're not in compliance?
Could you ask them if they had been busted for a safety issue? Maybe that's why they considered it as a goal.
Maybe that's it. I don't know, but I suspect all they did was take the school safety plan and say, "Oh, it looks like a good improvement plan. We'll put that in there, and we'll label it school improvement. And since it's supposed to be our own decisions, we'll know what to do." But I would suspect that, if these things were actually being read at the state level, which I'm assuming they're probably not, because they're not any more interested in a little bit more paperwork than everybody else. But, in my mind, it's not a matter of paperwork. It's a matter of, if you want the school to get better, this is how you do it. This is the way you go about doing it. And you can't really do much of anything without a plan. And so it is unfortunate that you had that experience where what you found was really kind of a safety plan, and not emergency safety plan, and not really a school improvement plan. But it is good that you have an active school improvement team. It seems that with a little nudging and things like that, you might be able to get them in a better direction. But without the administrative support at the top, it's probably not going to happen. So, but you can figure it out. Yeah, go ahead.
So this is the first school that I've been in like a leadership position, not admin, and I apologize for the background noise.
Oh, gee, is that a munchkin?
Oh, yes. At other schools that I've taught at, I never knew what the school improvement goals were. I knew they were there, but I never knew what they were. And where I'm working now, every single agenda has the goals on them, and there's 12 of them. And we certainly don't all have them memorized, but we know that it's a priority.
It should be.
So I have no idea what you said. I'm sorry.
So that's the way it should be.
Right. Well, and it's just interesting to me that it's not like that at the other schools. So I've taught at I don't know, 6 or 7 schools in 14 years, which sounds like a lot. Wow. Now that I said that out loud, maybe it's not that many. Anyway, this is the first admin that I've worked for that it's really been a focus for the whole entire staff. Like, these are our goals. This is what we're working for. And I will say this is the first high school that I've worked for as well. So I don't know. I wonder if that's a difference as well.
It could
Those
be.
Are you ready?
Yeah, high schools are a bit of a different creature. In that, you know, I think there really are. Well, if you take out middle school, I think middle school is just nuts anyhow. So, you know, it's a crazy place to work. But, you know, there really are 4 kind of school levels. You know, there's that early literacy based school level, maybe up to grade 2, maybe 3 sometimes, depending on whether, you know, kids have some deficits. And then there's the upper elementary, which is, you know, 4 through 6, maybe in some places, or 3 through 6 sometimes, or whatever, which becomes a much more content focused area. And so you move developmentally from literacy understandings and just getting the language of what you need to understand to communicate, you know, in a cognitive manner. And then you move into a more heavily content thing in the upper elementary. And then you get to middle school, and middle school is kind of 6 of one, half dozen of the other sometimes, depending upon the slant, because a lot of middle schools are actually early high school, you know, sort of they take a very content focus and don't spend as much time developmentally. And that's been the drive over the last few accountability years, that we are more, you know, sort of a content focus in middle schools. You get to high school and it's all content, all content, all content. And it's, you know, we can't stuff enough stuff into them, sort of idea, which is really, well, we won't go into what I think about that, but it is that sort of idea that content is primary among everything. Content is the most important thing to worry about. And so, you know, high schools are kind of a unique place that way. Content expertise in faculty tends to be sort of the agency of power. And so if you have folks that are, you know, have a bit more experience, a bit more background, you know, a couple of extra degrees, whatever, they tend to exercise a certain amount of power within the school building. And whether that's consistent with what the school wants to do or not, then it's kind of like, you know, be damned about that. We're just going to do, you know, because that's not right. We need to do it this way. And so it takes a particular brand of leadership to manage a high school. In my mind, elementaries are probably a little bit less, at least for me, high school would be the most difficult thing. I could almost manage a middle school better than I could a high school because of, you know, all the ego type things that happen in high school. And plus there, you know, there's high schoolers, kids are doing more extracurricular stuff, and there's a lot of potency into that. And, you know, the principal I worked for a few years, he would always, he'd talk about, you know, I got to meet with the band Nazis this morning, and that meant the band parents. And so, you know, that was kind of his take on some of that. But you know, he ran a really nice, well put together, well organized school, but he realized all the, you know, sort of the power structures that existed in high school. Some of those in middle school, not as many in elementary, but yeah.
I wanted to share that I was actually very impressed with mine. I was in the BOT about 5 years ago, and we had a different template, I guess. And then about 3 or 4 years ago, we started using NC Star.
Mm-hmm.
And basically, it follows the same format that what is it, Tracy's book shows. So it was very, very easy for me to compare. So I was happy to see that, because I'm like, well, if I ever become an administrator, that should be easy to understand. And it has everything.
Yeah, and that's why I mentioned that you know, that was one piece of the readings that you needed to read, because you know, that one is very well very practical, very well put together, and she does follow the same model. NC Star is based around a whole bunch of other models, by the way, and so it kind of, those models all kind of thread together in that stuff that the Tracy text material was talking about. Yeah, I mean, if we could just get schools to do that, you know, just do that. But we always seem to think that this is something that is over and above and doesn't really need to be done that way. So it's a difficult task to work with.
Well, when I took my job, I actually inherited the school improvement plan in Indostar, and having to put the artifacts in the meeting minutes, and it kind of was a paradigm shift for me, because prior to that, it was kind of a, well, if you vote no, then you get to rewrite it kind of ordeal. So when when I took it over, I don't know if it was the teacher in me for all those years that never fully saw the connections. But I kind of adopted, with our principal, I adopted what Megan was talking about. Every item that we talk about that has pertinence to the school improvement plan on our agendas, it's linked. So you fully understand, we're making these contacts and we're doing these newsletters and whatnot because this is our goal, and we're going to check this off and we're going to have proof for it, and then we're going to build on that goal. So I'm with Zindy. That Indostar is about the best thing that's happened, I think, for me. But seeing it from the other side now, the picture is a lot more clear. And I think I kind of have it's still a beast and I'm still learning, but I do think I have an idea of how it needs to be connected in order for it not to sit on a shelf. Because it's just a hoop for teachers to jump through. It doesn't mean anything unless you give it meat, I guess is the best way to say that.
Yeah, I mean, in the best of circumstance, it drives resource to a certain extent, and should drive resource to a certain extent. That, yeah, I mean, you always have limitations with resource. You never have enough, and you know, unless you're out getting money in the community and things like that, which we kind of talked about a little bit about last time. But it's if you think that you can depend upon, you know, you'll have enough money to do all these things that everybody wants to do, it's not going to happen. It's never going to happen. And at least it's easier for a faculty member or a staff to understand if they have been a part of that whole planning process from the get-go. And, you know, my way of thinking about budgets was always that budget was an open book. That if somebody wanted to know, you know, what budget we have for this or what budget we have for that, yeah, I mean, I never hit a budget that I was responsible for, because I think if people are invited into the fold in terms of a little bit of the decision making, obviously somebody has to make the final decision and has to, you know, sign off on something or pull the plug or whatever. But if at least they can understand why decisions are being made, why, you know, we would like to do this, but we just don't have the resource to do that. Plus, that wouldn't be terribly useful until we do this other thing. You know, what's a prerequisite to that we need to have in hand? And so that's that whole environmental scan idea, that you need that that sort of prerequisite to knowledge and baseline to know where you can go, because you need to know where you are. And I just think the more involved a faculty and a staff is in understanding the dynamics of the school and the dynamics of budgets and the dynamics of staffing and all those sorts of things, the better off as an administrator you're going to be, because people get upset over things they can't understand or don't understand. And so if they've been involved in the planning process and the implementation process, the evaluation process and the replanning process and all that, then they know why, you can make a pretty good case for why, particular decisions are being made. So you always have to have that sort of idea, going in. An informed faculty is a whole lot easier to work with than an uninformed faculty when it comes to what's going on in the building and what can be happening. Plus, it also helps faculty members to understand other programs in the building and what other people are doing and why it's a certain high priority for them, and all of those things. And you can sort of lend yourself or lead yourself into types of group type decision processes. So it's really kind of a key thing to do. But it does require an effort. This is not one of those things that you can, mail it in. It does require an effort. And, the short-term cost is high because of the effort involved, but the long-term benefit is also high. And the effort becomes a little bit lessened if you actually get a good plan in place and you start operating according to that plan. Then the effort for the next cycle and the next cycle and the next cycle is not nearly as difficult. But once again, I hope I'm coaching to the choir here, because this is, it's you see it in schools. In some schools you just don't see it. And there is a kind of a break in this thing too, where I have a student that I sat in on this afternoon. She was doing a pre-defense for her dissertation, which she's going to defend in a couple weeks. And she was, her focus is on, sort of females not being considered for leadership positions in manufacturing industry. She's in a manufacturing industry. She works for Volvo truck division. And so, she's been there for several years. And so now she's beginning to see how that plays out in the manufacturing industry or the private sector. Not much different than the public sector. Public sector is maybe a little bit better, not quite as bad as the private sector. But one chart she had done was to look at kind of age differences. And, for younger age groups, the number of people or differences between males and females had been decreasing as you looked at that. And so there was higher percentage of females than in past and things like that. But once you hit that, where they had been in the business about 20 years or 25 years or whatever, it went entirely the other way. And so you saw very few females in these leadership positions that were, 50-ish and 60-ish. Although you saw a lot of males, many more males at 50 and 60. And so I think it's kind of, it's cultural. It also might be kind of generational to a certain extent. And so what we may be beginning to be seeing is that folks that are, kind of new people coming into the field, to the leadership model, that have a better sense of how to go about doing these sorts of things, and a better sense of the, sort of involvement and participation in the organization or in the setting from everybody in it, as opposed to a purely top-down thing. So, I think that's my hopeful cry, is that I think there are, I mean, you are being better prepared to do this than perhaps they had been prepared to do it. Plus, culturally, it was a new thing. Thoughts about that? We have any budding or strongly incensed feminists in the group?
I know where I worked before, there were no females in leadership positions in our office. It was all men, and like all office women pretty much made the same amount of pay. And I did graphic arts and web design, and I actually got a $10,000 a year raise when I started teaching. So yeah, I see it in the business. I don't see it so much in the school system, but I did see it in business.
Yeah, it's still there in the school system, but it's, once again, I think it is a little bit of a generational thing, but it's also a cultural thing. And you know, how you change culturally is you just start doing things differently. That's how culture changes. You just start doing things differently. And you know, with success comes the ability to influence culture. So I don't know. It just struck me that that was a very interesting piece of work she was working on, because you know, she I told her, you know, you make sure you understand when you finish this dissertation and you're going to give the company a copy of it, make sure that you've taken a good look at that copy and haven't done anything to, you know, tick off your 65-year-old boss or your 70-year-old boss. So, you know, it's okay if you've ruffled your 40-year-old boss, but, you know, don't worry, try to stay away from the 70-year-old one or the 65-year-old one, because it's the way it is. So I'm assuming some of you have seen that. But don't want to necessarily get into that. Okay. So other things you saw in the school improvement plans that you saw?
I'm at an elementary school, and I've been there. My principal started at the same school the year before me. I am the last of the starting 4, I would say, because I'm an elective. I'm the media specialist. So getting on the team was, everybody kind of figured that I would have been on the school improvement team like 2 years ago, but she chose somebody else, and I was fine with that until I started the program. And now that I'm on it, I don't know if it's just me, because I am a sense of urgency person. Like, I'm like, okay, what's the plan? What's the goal? So my section is teacher retention, which they had it as a goal for the past 4 years, but nothing had been done with it. So when I met with my team, I was like, okay, well, have y'all ever thought about doing a survey? And it was like, oh, that's a great idea. So I put it together. So there's things, the plan is amazing. Everything that has been on the plan, we have grown with, as far as instruction and trying to improve attendance and our ESL program, we've made strides, but there's these little issues that we've had that I don't know if they hadn't thought of it, or because, and my principal is great, but it seems to me like the people who have been on the team have always been on the team.
Yeah.
And to me, that seems like, okay, well, maybe they just got stagnant and was like, okay, whatever you want to do. And they're not trying to push the envelope and really, they don't want to have to rewrite anything. They don't want to do any harder work. And maybe new people need to come on to be like, okay, I'm game to, you know, what needs to be done. Let's make even more strides. So those were the things that I noticed, just looking at the plan and being on the team.
Yeah. Yeah, putting those teams together, stocking those teams, and they do need turnover. I mean, they need a regular turnover. There are some people that have to be on them or need to be on them. by design, and they should be there. And then there are folks that seem to, as you say, have a spot on there and just kind of maintain, stay on there. But there needs to be some turnover, and you need two things. You need fresh energy, and you also need institutional memory. And so you have to have someone. You have to have several people on there that kind of remembers how some things went, and what happened in the past and how it was put together and all. But you also need new vitality, and it doesn't have to necessarily be young. It just needs to be new. It needs to be a different, sort of a different voice on it. We tend to do the same thing with parents. We tend to pick the same parents all the time to do all the things that we want to engage parents in. And, perhaps we need to rotate that around a bit too, and not lock it into the president of the PTSA or whatever, or, things like that, but to actually have, some parental involvement that's meaningful and not just a rubber stamp sort of thing. But organizing those teams are a very big deal. And there needs to be a constant look at those to make sure that you don't get into that stagnant sort of idea. I was never mind. I won't go into the story, but I was on a committee at the prior institution I was at for 12 years, trying to get off of it. And for those 12 years, had spent 7 years trying to get off of it. But for some reason, the president kept sticking me back on the same committee, and part of it was because of my expertise, but there were other people that had the same expertise. And I asked him after several years. I said, I'd really like to get off of that because we were, casual friends too. I'd really like to get off of that. Why do you keep putting me back on there? And he said, well, I know who you are. I don't have to worry about what idiot I might be putting on there. I know the idiot I got. And, that was kind of the way we talked to each other. It was kind of a level of sarcasm that passed for friendship, so to speak. But he didn't want to change it because, I was the idiot he knew, as opposed to what the next one would be. And, sometimes leaders get into that mold too. And the committee gets to certain smoothness and a certain working mode, and it seems like it works really well, except it doesn't do anything new. It kind of keeps things moving along in a comfortable arc without really, challenging things every now and then, or implementing something new, or thinking about, okay, is this the way we want it to be, or do we want it to be different? So that whole idea of strategic planning and then organizing around the strategic plan to develop a school improvement plan is, there are lots of trade-offs. There are things that you just have to figure out how you're going to work around that. And I don't have a clear answer for it because it is what it is. But it is not something that you do as a school leader. It's not something you do as an aside. It's something that has to be somewhere near the center at times of the year, and things that you have to pay some attention to at times. You can't ever let it go off in the corner and die out on its own. That was a horrible analogy, when it go out in the corner and die. Oh, well, never mind. Other comments or thoughts about this, about what you saw in those school improvement plans?
I'm at Zindy School, and I really like the fact that our faculty is a part of the school improvement plan. Each team leader goes in and talks to their team about the things that they discuss. And then that team leader takes it back to the school improvement committee and they talk about it. So everybody feels involved in the process. Like you were saying, it seems to help.
It does help, and we don't ask for it in this project, but it is kind of imperative that you have a communication plan too within a building as to how everybody stays up to speed on what's going on in the building, and you know, what the initiatives are, and resource availabilities, and you know, all those things that are part and parcel of running a building or running an organization. But you need to have a communications model that allows, you know, for that two-way up and down communication to take place. And whether you do it through a, you know, a peer-to-peer thing, or whether you do it in more informal ways, like, you know, coffee breaks with the principal, or, you know, stuff like that. You have to have a kind of a way of organizing the flow of information within a building, so that everybody feels like they have an avenue to get information, but also to surface ideas or surface issues or things like that. I mean, too often people feel the only person they can go to is the principal. And that's probably, in some ways, the worst person to go to, because all you do is put them in a box. You put them back them into a corner, and they're either going to make you feel good or they're going to make you mad. 6 1 half does the other. But if you force them to make a decision, they'll make a decision. You may not like what you get, but if you've been able to build a case and support it among other people, among other members of the faculty and other staff and other people in the building, then perhaps you get a better listen, because it came about, you know, the right direction. It came from the bottom up and not from the top down. So that communication plan is a big deal, but I'm assuming there's one of the courses in the program deals with that school communication sort of notion. At least I hope it does. So how did the group process go last week? Do you feel that you got going, and at least you know kind of how you're going to get there? And well, next week's is another one of those async things, with the primary focus being kind of get the groups functioning, you know, move those things along so that you know, it doesn't become kind of a last minute thing to deal with. And so the next week will be the same sort of group information. It will be, let me see. There's one thing in there, you know, complete the data collection. You may not have completed data collection by then. And I understand that. I think that was a little ambitious target necessarily. But if you have, you have. If you haven't, you haven't. But it is something that you should, you know, be delving into, is kind of some of that data of, you know, what about, well, you should have made a decision about the selected program you're going to evaluate as a team, or should have that decision pretty close. And you ought to be thinking about, you know, what's the data points, or what's the metric or the data we're going to need to kind of understand whether this idea of this program is working or not. And I think it's a little ambitious to think that you would have collected the data, but you may have. I suspect probably not completely. Is that a pretty good read? I hope so. I don't want to, you know, I don't want to sound like I have lower expectations for you. I just understand all the things that are happening right now, and that maybe, you know, we need to be somewhat aware of some of the dilemmas that you may be dealing with. But we have plenty of time. We'll get it all done. Not much problem here. Any questions about where we're going, what you're doing, or I mean, we will probably be on this model of meeting for short periods of time on synchronous nights for an hour, hour and a half, maybe more if we get into something that really requires some deep dive on things. And then we'll have plenty of time available after the beginning of synchronous class sessions if you want to take that opportunity to work or at least touch base as teams. Or we will also have, or we'll have open dates that will be asynchronous, that'll be focused more around the team stuff.
Well, I did have, sorry. I don't know. Go ahead.
One of you.
Okay. I was just gonna ask about the school improvement plan project. I was looking at it just because it looks that it's long, and it got to some part where it was asking about, I think it was like state reforms or different things like that.
Yeah.
And I was wondering if we were gonna go over that. I don't have.
Yeah, we will, because the one of those outside elements that you really can never anticipate is what changes might be made at the state level, what sort of politically motivated changes might occur, what sort of decisions might be made about a particular curriculum model or particular curriculum materials, what changes might be made to accreditation standards. All of those require a period of hearing and comment and all those things. But stuff that the legislature does is a little bit you get a little bit less of a heads up. That tends to pop up, and you just have to figure out how to deal with it. But your solace is that everybody's trying to figure out how to deal with it, so you can kind of work together with it. But it's that element of the planning process that you can never really anticipate. Those outside things, like you can't anticipate COVID. I mean, where did this come from? A year ago, this time, I was getting ready to take a nice trip up north and see my, son and daughter-in-law and our first grandchild. And, we went up there, and the minute we got back, we walked into a shutdown. Now, who could have anticipated where we will go from here? I'm thinking we'll be not normal, but more regular by the fall. I'm thinking we will not see, kind of a completely regular sort of format that we can fall into, whatever that looks like, until probably next summer and into the following school year. With all these variants and all, now we're kind of thinking it's going to be, we got to kind of figure out how to deal with all that stuff. And Fauci, and who can question Fauci too much about things? He says we'll be wearing a mask well into 2022. And in some circumstances, we'll be wearing a mask and doing some level of social distancing, probably for the next couple of 3 years. So, we're in an evolving period of time, and we don't know, what all those things that you might have to respond to in a school improvement plan that are related to, state initiatives and division initiatives that you don't even know what they might be yet. So but we will talk, we'll look at a case study that kind of deals with that in a little bit more detail. A couple of 3 sessions back on down the road here, where we talk about some of those outside influences, political influences, and things like that, that become kind of a wild card in the whole process. But those are never a reason not to plan because we don't know what the state's going to do. Those are a reason to plan. Because very often the state and divisions build around successful models. And if you have a school that exhibits a successful model, you may get to drive some of those decisions anyhow. But never assume that you have to wait for what the state says or what the division says. You keep moving forward. And because if you allow yourself to stop, then you will stop. And that's just that's my coach thing for the day. If you allow yourself to stop, you will.
May I ask a question? Can you talk a little bit about the reflective strategic plan, reflective leader
Sure.
thing to Friday? I know we read about it, but I'm not sure if that's I'm not quite sure what we're supposed to do for that. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Sure. Yeah. All those reflection pieces are based around the idea that you all have different sets of experiences, different sets of backgrounds, different sets of skill set. I mean, you have different skill sets. Some of it's natural, some of it's developed. All those sorts of things. And so each one of you will have a take on what strategic planning may mean to you. Now, you can look at the Tracy stuff and say, okay, this is how to do it. Step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4. But as an individual that's moving in kind of the direction of school leadership, you have some thoughts too about what are the highest priority things and how might you approach those things, or what things are going to be the easiest for you to do versus which one of these things are going to be more difficult for me to do. And it will vary from person to person, I think, a bit. Maybe not as much overall, but as a bit, it will vary. And so I'm wanting you to think about this model of strategic planning and the stuff that was in the Tracy material about how you go about doing it and the steps and all that. And once again, kind of looking inside, these are reflected pieces, kind of looking inside. What will be easy for me to do about that? What will be difficult for me to do about that? Are there parts of it I have to learn more about? Is that a skill I need to add? Is that a knowledge I need to add? And so it really is, as all the reflective pieces are, is to look, kind of within yourself. And all right, how am I going to handle this? How am I going to do strategic planning? How am I going to, what's my comfort level with doing this, or involving other people in this process? Because from what the text material talked about, and I couldn't give you a better guide for that, because it's, you can kind of lay out the steps. Here's a good way to do this. But you have to have some sense about which parts of that are going to be problems for you and which parts are going to be easy.
Thank you. That helps.
I know that doesn't help a whole lot, but
no, it makes more sense to me now. Just listening to you, I process better when I hear stuff. So just listening to you talk about it makes more sense. Thank you.
Yeah. There's a lot of, and kind of going from where you are now to where you want to get to, there's a lot of that sort of self-reflective process that needs to take place. And, for some of you may decide, as you kind of move in that direction, that your self-reflection may lead you to say, nah, I don't know, I want to do that now. So, it's better to make that decision on the front side than on the back side after you've taken the job and signed the contract and you know, all that sort of stuff to do that. But, you know, it is a process of kind of, you know, looking inside and taking the measure of your own self. Metacognition at play. Other questions? I'm sure I'll think of about 10 things that I meant to say tonight that I didn't say. If I do, I'll write those down and send them to you in an email or a little video thing. I've got to get into my little video thing here. Got everything set up now to do it. And so need to produce a few little videos for classes. And yours is one of those. So know what to do next week. All set up to talk about teams, talk with your team, work with your team. Anybody else? Questions, comments, gripes related to the class? Okay. Are related to me. I mean,
Well, one comment is every time we do a project for any of these classes, I get a new job.
Or
at least I'm going to have plenty of internship hours.
Yeah. You know, I really don't have an answer for you there. It sounds like, yeah, it could be a personal problem. I don't know, but you know, it's, yeah, I know what you mean. It is, and that's why once I got out of administration, I never wanted to get back in, even when I was being courted for some things, because, man, it's after you've done that for a while, you kind of, or at least I did, I kind of thought, well, you know, maybe there's another way to go here. It doesn't take quite so much hide off all the time. And I managed to keep all my hair. So, you know, I got out before I lost any hair. So moving along. All right. But of course, I wish for you all the success in the world, whatever it is you plan to do. I think between you and Megan, you probably, you know, you maybe don't have a good track record in maintaining jobs or places of employment, but that's okay. You know, kind of goes and comes, and yeah. Nothing, just, you know, I warned you, I am sarcastic.
Hey, I've only been at 4 schools in 10 years.
Oh, that's okay. That's good.
I really don't think it was that many. I was talking without thinking. I promise it's tended a lot worse than it really is.
Well, yeah, as I said, it's all relative, you know, it doesn't matter. Okay, folks, go away, do what you need to do. Get working on these things. If you need me, give me a yell. You know, I keep begging for one-on-ones and nobody ever calls me. And you know, give me a yell, send me an email, whatever. If you need, you know, have a question or you know, as you get into the writing parts of these things a little bit, you have a you know, something you're not quite sure about or whatever. Yeah, okay, give me a yell. And we'll see how it goes. Okay. All right, I'll see you in 2 weeks. So make good use of next week, okay? And get some team stuff done. All right, I will see you in 2 weeks.
Have a good night.
Hey, folks.
I kind of have a different question that's not related to class.
Sure, go ahead.
You've been a principal before, correct?
Not been a principal, no.
Okay.
My administrative experience has been in colleges or universities, but I've worked with an awful lot of principals on about 25 or 30 different grants and things like that. So I've got a lot of good principal friends.
I'll reach out to you another time, but I wanted to find out if you were an appropriate resource. I'm applying for a virtual teaching EC position
Mhm.
with Watauga County. And I really want this opportunity because it involves leadership as well. I'll be the only EC teacher. So like, even though I have the teacher label, I'll have the role of being the EC specialist in the virtual academy, if that makes sense. And I'm trying to prepare myself with interview questions that they might ask. And I want to
Yeah.
impress, not, tell lies. And, I want them to get an accurate picture, but I don't want to be like surprised or hit with something and not know how to answer.
Yeah. Well, there are certain sets of things, and once again, we can do this another time if you would
Yeah.
prefer to do it another time. But there are certain things that they're going to want to know, and a lot of it has to do. Well, one, they're going to want to know if you got the skill set to do this. I mean, can you?
Right.
Yeah, or you got the certifications, the skill set, the kind of the virtual side of things under control. You know, the all the software and the different tools and all that. The big thing they're going to try to gauge is how well uh, you are ways in which you can work with the regular content virtual teachers, and how can you add to their ability to serve these students, because I'm assuming that most of these students are still there's still going to be kind of a desire to uh, get them in with other kids as much as possible, whatever they're going to call that, in a
Right.
virtual environment. And so you're going to want to interact with those kids interacting with the non-categorical kids, some. I think that's going to be the big tone of the question is how do you feel you can work with this, and what gives you, kind of the for lack of a better term, gall to think that you can pull this.
Yeah.
Yeah. How do you, what is it that you have to offer us that, maybe somebody else that doesn't have quite the experiences you have to offer us? How can you help those kids move forward?
Okay.
And so I think questions along those lines are going to be a big part of it. The other are going to be the standard format. It's what do you think of Watauga County schools and blah 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 blah. All those things that you can probably finesse, just by being personable and finesse those. But they are going to want to know, I would think, some very specific things about what you bring to the job and the role that will benefit these students.
Okay. So I need to get creative with my answers in that. And there's a lot of things like my biggest thing is like I've grown so much. I'm only a fourth year teacher. Like, and I don't want to say I'm only one either, but like I am a relatively young teacher, and I know that there's going to be some competition, especially with that virtual